All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Ask Us Anything. Today, we are going to be talking about equipment maintenance and intended use. My name is Amanda Cameron, and I'm a quality and food safety specialist at Perennia, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So before we get to the questions, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So your audio and video will be turned off during the webinar. If you have a question that you want to ask, you can pop it into the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and I'll be answering those questions throughout. I'll be monitoring those questions throughout the webinar, so I can ask them where it makes sense, or I can save them for the end when we have a Q&A session. You're also responsible for choosing your preferred view as a participant. So there's a gallery view and a speaker view that you can choose from, and I do recommend choosing the gallery view on your screen so that you're not jumping between screens when the speakers are talking. If you are unfamiliar with Perennia, Perennia supports the growth, transformation, and economic development in Nova Scotia's agriculture, seafood, and food and beverage sectors. Our speakers answering your questions today are going to be Shelley McDonald, who is our co-manager of the Quality and Food Safety Department. She is the lead trainer at Perennia, and if you know her, you know that she is very passionate about educating our clients and transferring that knowledge that she has. She has helped various clients navigate food safety regulations and third-party certification. Our other speaker is going to be Elaine Grant, who is the other co-manager of the Quality and Food Safety Department. She's worked at Perennia for more than a decade and has helped many clients with their quality and food safety programs. She tends to work with the smaller food businesses, and because of that, she really prioritizes making written programs practical and easily maintained as these businesses grow. All right, we can get started with some questions. And Shelley, do you want to start us off by discussing what needs to be considered in regards to equipment maintenance and intended use?
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. Welcome, everybody. Food processing equipment requires a written preventive maintenance program. This preventive maintenance program involves maintenance, lubrication, parts replacement, cleaning, and sanitizing of equipment to ensure it is functioning effectively and as intended. Let's be honest. Most of us have a reactive program where we wait until things happen or we're faced with an issue before we address the problem. Prevention is key. Proactively taking care of your equipment prevents food safety risks as well as protects the employee's safety and ensures ongoing production, not leading to unnecessary downtime.
Great. So what would you say some benefits of having a preventative maintenance program are?
I like to relate things back to the real world. So let's talk about vehicles, for example. Would you attempt to drive anywheres in a vehicle that you know doesn't have any gas, that you know doesn't have any oil, or that has poor tires? I'm hoping you would say no, because if you did do so, you're going to be faced with downtime, meaning you're going to end up on the side of the road, and now you're also going to be faced with huge costs that were unnecessary. So, for example, calling a tow truck and then getting that vehicle to the repair shop and having to replace the tires, fill the gas tank. Now, if there's no oil in the engine seized up, a new engine. So by proactively taking care of things, it's saving you money and saving you time.
Great. So now I'll jump into a few of the questions we got from participants that were registering. So someone asked, how do you determine the frequency for your maintenance tasks?
Well, there's quite a few variables that come into play there. Primarily it depends on how often you're using that piece of equipment. If you're using it quite a bit, you might have to replace more moving parts. In contrast to this, some equipment doesn't do well sitting, So you might want to maybe do a pre-check or do a post-activity maintenance on a seasonal type of situation. And then well in advance, check it again to make sure you're ready to go the first, when you start your season. And I mean, if you have sheer amounts of volume, you're probably going to have to do more maintenance. And even your type of product, really, because if you have an overly oily product or something, it might be wear and tear in your gaskets, or if there's a lot of moving parts that way, your conveyor belt may have more, you know, broken parts on it or more wear, I guess. Quality of parts would come into play too. So if you started it with a cheap piece of equipment with cheap parts, those aren't going to last very long. You want to make sure you have good quality parts or the proper parts, sitting around ready to throw in there. And it honestly just depends on the manufacturer's instructions as well. So, and you have to take into account your environment and the type of product. So.
Yes, for sure. So it's a really it depends type of scenario for that answer. So the next question is, what are the most common issues or deviations that food safety specialists see when you're touring, consulting, assisting food manufacturing plants?
Overall maintenance of the facility is a big one, as well as temporary repairs we have seen on pieces of equipment. So when I talk about the building maintenance, doors, they are not close fitting. You can see light through them. Windows are not properly screened. There's cracks in the foundation. Basically, there's that chance of pest entry. So maintaining the facility is just as important as maintaining your equipment. And in terms of the temporary repairs, we have seen a lot of different examples of those. Cable ties, we've seen holding pieces of equipment together. We've seen wrenches attached, string, tape, cardboard, all kinds of modifications. So those are some of the most common deviations or issues that we see in terms of maintenance.
And those facility repairs, I mean, it's just sad. Those are givens, right? You see those nonconformances come into play. It's always a door gasket. And it's always the first thing I look for. And it's always normally the easiest thing to repair, right? Same with the screen. Like, that's just standard requirement. You got to have a screen in place or a screen that's repaired. Temporary repairs, sometimes people forget about them because the temporary turns into permanent, especially if you're waiting for parts. Those are understandable because you walk by it every day and you kind of forget about it, is what happens. Or you just don't have the repair parts on, you have to order something or make something, and forget what you needed to fix. Or unrealistic schedules, that's the other thing, Shelley, right? Like, we've seen either no preventative maintenance, it's all reactive. And that's a common mistake that people make just because, I don't know, they just don't think about it. Or maybe they have a maintenance person that they have to hire contractors in to kind of do the primary maintenance or the major maintenance, and they do their own. They kind of forget about the moving parts that needs to be repaired on a regular basis that they can do in-house. They just forget to write it down.
Another thing to keep in mind is your pest control provider. If they've identified an issue with your facility maintenance, so for example, they've identified a crack in the foundation and you do not correct that, you will take a nonconformance during your third-party audit or during an inspection. So take those suggestions and recommendations seriously and fix any building maintenance that has been addressed in those service reports.
I'm going to add to that, Shelley. Some people don't see their pest control providers and don't read those reports. And you need to connect with them whenever they come in. You need to be connecting with them either over the phone or even better yet, go around with them, especially if it's a repeat issue. Maybe they didn't tell you exactly where you need to do these repairs. So it's always good to go over once in a while, just do a walk around with them and make sure you're clear on what needs to be fixed.
And I'm sure for those of you who attend these Ask Us Anything or Perennia webinars, You've heard us say over and over again that it's 3 steps. So you're saying what you do, you're doing what you say, and you prove it. So going back to Elaine, where she mentioned having unrealistic schedules, if your preventative maintenance is written in such a way that it says on a daily basis, you're going to do this, on a weekly basis and a monthly basis and so on, and you're not actually following that written program, then you're not doing what you say you're doing, and you're going to take a nonconformance. So make sure the preventative maintenance makes sense for your company and the piece of equipment.
Sure. Yeah, we see that often with some clients. They say, oh, we got this new piece of equipment, but we don't know how frequently we should be looking at it. So we just make sure to add an inspection so that they actually look at it. So if there's no inspection piece added, then there's no reason for them to look at it. So even adding an inspection and then checking if the gaskets are good at that point, and then if they're fine, that's okay. You just have to say, I inspected it. They're good, and then I'll re-inspect them, and then if they're bad at that point, then you take action and you fix the gaskets or whatever it may be. For our next question, what consideration should be given before purchasing or acquiring equipment, and why?
This is a good question. And we hear a lot of the times the QA department says, I wasn't involved in the purchasing. And maintenance also says that. And that's not something we want to hear. That's not best practices. So the person responsible for purchasing, sourcing, procuring new equipment, whether that's the general manager or whoever it may be, should be using a multidisciplinary team. So they should be speaking to the maintenance department. They should be bringing in sanitation. They should be bringing in QA, and as a team discussing whether or not that piece of equipment that they plan to purchase is the right piece of equipment for your facility. Is it going to function as intended in your commodity? We've seen companies purchase equipment that is intended for something not their commodity, and then all of a sudden end up having a recall because, let's say, it's a washing. It doesn't wash the fruit properly. And now all of a sudden the bacteria is still on the outside of it, and then they end up in a recall situation. So you really have to do your research before you decide what pieces of equipment you plan to purchase. And then another thing is, where are you purchasing this piece of equipment? Are you getting it from an auction? And if you are you cleaning that piece of equipment properly? Because if you're buying it from an auction, did it come from a meat plant? Did it come from a peanut factory where, you need to be concerned about allergens? Did they clean it properly? Anytime you're bringing equipment into your facility, you're going to do a full-on cleanup and a sanitization prior to using it. And the same with after any maintenance that happens in your facility. So consider those. And if you're purchasing it from a country where you can get it a little bit cheaper, you also have to consider whether or not it's going to meet Canadian standards. So it's one thing to purchase a piece of equipment because you're saving money up front, but is there going to be long-term costs when you bring it here into Canada? Do you have to rewire it? Does the plugs in your facility, is it going to work for that piece of equipment, and so on? Do you need to bring in somebody from that country to service and commission that equipment? Can you get a local technician to do that? What about the replacement parts? Do you have local suppliers for those replacement parts, or do you have to constantly be purchasing them from that other country and knowing that they need to be shipped, and it could take a little bit longer to get those parts here opposed to getting them locally?
Yeah, I'll add to that too. I had experience with this in past manufacturing life where we had an engineer he was actually hired from an oil and gas industry, and he thought, oh, I got a great diaphragm pump. This will work great for pumping out milk out of barrels. And that didn't work so well. We ended up having micro issues with it, and we were kind of blaming the product coming in, which it wasn't making sense. And we spent all this time testing and figuring it out. When we went and dismantled the pump, it was full of mold and all sorts of horrible stuff because you couldn't clean it because it wasn't meant for food. And because that engineer brought it in and didn't talk to us, didn't talk to the sanitation or even the people on the floor that would be using the equipment and, you know, had years and years of experience of knowing what would work and what wouldn't. That ended up causing a lot of headache for us, to be honest. And we end up replacing with a more expensive pump. So you bought a pump you can't use, and then you spend all this time in testing and holding product and discarding product, and then it turns out it was just like, if we had just bought the right thing first, it would have been fine. So make sure, and the other thing we noticed too is that people buy things because it seems like a good deal, but they outgrow it really quickly. I see this a lot with coolers, freezers. They buy this like little cooler cheap. They get it on an auction. It's great. It's going to work great, but they can't even, they outgrow it within a year. So then it's not a good deal. They had got one that was a bit newer or bigger. They would have increased the cooling capacity and grown. So you really need to include your, you know, upper management, purchasing, planners, that kind of thing. When you do bring in, you know, expand or bring a new piece of equipment in, you need to talk to people.
That's a great point. You should always be looking 5 years down the road, never right now. Another thing to keep in mind is if you're getting a secondhand piece of equipment, it might not come with the owner's manual or the service manual. So the website, you can go online and, you know, type in models and things like that. Make sure you know when you need to be maintaining the piece of equipment. It might even be through trial and error, but if that's the case, then you always want to start more frequently and then change it after you know your volume that you're going to be pumping through that piece of equipment.
I think metal detectors are a buyer beware situation too, because some of them seem like good deals, but then you don't have that support to get it set up. So then you never get it working quite right. And then it ends up being a paperweight over to the side, or it doesn't detect metal, which is like worst case scenario, or it detects it too much and everything's getting kicked off and you have no product support for it. So it's important to really, you know, weigh all that into the price and cost. Sometimes a deal is not a deal. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and also the material too. So best practices is stainless steel. Um, if you're bringing in something that is not stainless steel, you want to ensure that it is going to be no risk to the food product, and that it is compatible for use in a food industry. Another thing people don't think about is they're purchasing equipment from a food manufacturing equipment company. And so they take it, you know, for granted that they will not need to modify anything. But then you get the piece of equipment here, and all of a sudden you realize that there are some little niche spots where bacteria can hide. And so now you need to weld that together so that nothing's getting up and hiding in those nook and crannies. So just because you're purchasing the equipment from a reputable food manufacturing equipment company doesn't mean you may not have to make modifications to the equipment for your needs.
That was a lengthy answer, but very detailed, lots to consider there. Okay, what should be done before and after conducting maintenance activities in a processing facility?
Well, I think, you know, employee safety is first, and I've seen this firsthand where lockout tagout wasn't a thing. I think it's probably definitely more common maybe for larger manufacturers. There are some smaller manufacturers I know that don't have it. I strongly recommend everybody to have a lockout tagout because it only takes 2 seconds for a QA to, or somebody get their hand stuck somewhere they shouldn't, and somebody powers on something on because they're doing stuff further down the line. Um, it's kind of traumatizing to see that happen to somebody. And everybody, even the QA, needs to have their own lock. If you have the lock style lockout tagout, everybody needs to have it, because if there's still a lock on that lockout tagout, you know, you don't start that, you can't start that equipment. It's that safety guard, right? So it shouldn't just be maintenance or production supervisor or cleaners. It should be everybody needs a lock to throw on that lock, that lockout tagout device.
Okay, I'll piggyback on what she says. This is also, yeah, where health and safety and food safety really intersect is a lot with maintenance. So hot work permits are another example, where you would want to make sure that everyone knows that there's going to be hot work happening, because there could be welding, cutting, sparks, any type of physical contamination. And then there's also the health and safety component where you don't want people around because they can be hurt from those things as well. So that's another consideration depending on what you're doing and where it's located.
Notification as well. Everybody should be trained to notify supervisors when maintenance activities are taking place, and not just when the maintenance activities are taking place and how long it's going to be, but also after the maintenance activities are completed, so that a full cleanup and sanitization can be done. And then, of course, inspect the equipment to make sure there's no tools lying around, no spare parts, or anything like that. So notifying people is really important.
I'll add on that too. If you're doing pipe work, you may not be able to get all the little nooks and crannies. It's a good idea to do a flush, especially if you're doing any kind of, I guess it'd be metal work for the most part, and capture that flush, especially when you think you flushed enough through. Usually it's the volume of the line, so there's a bit of math into that comes into play there. And take that last sample of what you think is okay and run it through a very fine sieve, with a magnet perhaps, and then you can double check to make sure that there is no metal in that line after that work is done. That's kind of a little hot tip. And if you want to know more about hot work permits, lockout, tagout, Nova Scotia Construction Association has training on that. They provide, educational support on that as well. So if you don't have something in play and you have a lot of moving parts, I would suggest you get on that.
And I'm not picking on maintenance, but for the longest time when I worked in industry, maintenance would always say to me, what do I have to do with food safety? What do I have to do with HACCP? Well, maintenance, preventative maintenance, calibration, that is a prerequisite program, a preventive control, a good manufacturing practice on its own. So talking about like what are things that you have to do before and after and during maintenance, there are no exceptions. So anybody that's coming in, whether it's a contractor or it's your own maintenance department working on the equipment, must be following the hygiene and good manufacturing practices. So if you're supposed to wear a hairnet, they wear a hairnet, no exceptions to the rules. No jewelry. They're wearing their proper PPE. They're following proper traffic flow, signing in if they are a contractor, and so on.
I think if you're a QA or even a supervisor in the food industry, you need to work very, very collaboratively and have a really good working relationship with your maintenance crew. They know so much about safety themselves that a lot of it will transpire into food safety. So, it'll keep you both safe and the food product safe if you guys everybody learns to get along, right? Like piggyback on what Shelley said. I think both of us, especially, probably Amanda too, we've all had in the past really good working relationship with maintenance. If you have a problem, you're going to need them to help you figure out what's going on the line. And it's just the simplest things that you may be overlooking or something they're trying to fix, working together, I think you end up creating a safer product. So.
And when nonconformances are identified and investigations have to be done, you may have to rely on maintenance and bring them in so that you get to the root cause, right? And put accurate preventive measures in place so that there's no recurrence. So it is really important to have good working relationships with all the departments in your facility. Good point, Elaine.
So I know we touched on earlier temporary modifications, temporary repairs. Are they okay? And when are they okay?
This is a bit of a dicey situation. So sometimes before you put a permanent fix in play, you do unfortunately need to embrace a temporary repair for like a minute. Just because somebody might have to, put a piece of cardboard, it better be a clean cardboard, in play to try and figure out why everything's kicking off a belt You know what I mean? Like they might have to take that template back and go back to the maintenance shop and make something out of, I don't know, HDPE or something, or a piece of metal plate. So you don't know until you try it. Where it comes into, like we mentioned before, is when those temporary repairs, people get, around to it. Everybody has a, you know, I'll get around to it, I'll get around to it, or we have to wait for a part or whatever, and then the part never comes. And then meanwhile, you have this temporary repair that's not cleanable, could be a foreign material hazard. And, it's just kind of sketchy. So, they're okay for like a second, and then you need to replace it.
So think of risk. Temporary repairs should not be putting food safety at risk. And if that's the case, you should not be using those temporary repairs. Also keep in mind the third-party certifications like the GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiatives, the SQF, the BRCGS, and so on. There is a whole section in those standards that talk about temporary repairs. So again, each and every one of you are going to be in different situations depending on the industry you work in, what standards you're following, what regulations you have to meet, and so on. So it's important that you know your third-party certifications and your standards, and that you are following those if you do have to implement, that short-term temporary repair. Just make sure it doesn't become permanent and long-term. That's all we're asking. And it does not pose a risk to food safety or the employee's health and safety.
Yeah, you should have some type of procedure in place to make sure that it doesn't become permanent. So for example, I worked at a facility that was, let's say, quite old, and I would have the maintenance person, if he had to do a maintenance repair or a temporary repair, he had to write the work order number on the temporary repair and the date. So that if I was walking around and I spotted a temporary repair, I wanted to know that there was already a plan to fix it and how long it's been there. So if I keep walking by it every Tuesday for 3 months and it's still there, then I can tell because the date was written on it. So that's just an example of the system that we had in place there.
That's a really good life hack right there. I wish that was available to me like 20 years ago. No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. And if you're going to take away anything out of this, take that one, because every QA be all excited about seeing that one for sure. It really helps because you don't know, you become blind to it, right? Like it's just,
The
you know,
date. The date was
yeah.
the big one. I said, the work order, I want the date. I said, tell me when you put this in place.
Yeah. And in the name of person to put it. So then you can follow up with them to see, is this going to get it repaired or what's going on with this,
Yeah, we eventually elevated to an app. So the app actually captured all that. So then I would just put the ID number from the app instead of the work order number. And it would tell me there was like a picture and everything on the app. Great use of technology. And then it would show me the status and everything. So I could know when it was in progress, what was ordered, and when it was done.
And I just want to add, because Elaine was saying, there's always lots to do, lots to do. I'll get around to it tomorrow. I'll get around to it tomorrow. When I worked in industry, one of the companies I worked for, it was a very large, busy, lots of things going on, lots of equipment. And there was only so many maintenance staff in the maintenance department. And sometimes it gets really overwhelming when they're handed work order after work order after work order. And then all of a sudden, they're not sure which activity they should be prioritizing. So what this company did was they implemented a color coding work order system where yellow was when you can get to it, that's great. And red was this is priority. And it was usually associated with any food safety risk or equipment, because we didn't want downtime, right? Let's be honest, production is all about pumping out product, making money, right? So they did that. You don't have to do that, but it worked really, really well for this maintenance department due to the size of the company and the size of the maintenance department too.
Another question that was asked was, do I need to disassemble the equipment each and every time for cleaning?
Yes. Well, I shouldn't say that. Some things cannot be disassembled, and it depends how much product is rolling through. And there's a lot of different factors, I guess, of how dirty things are when you do finally shut down and take a look at it, see how much buildup is in there. What am I missing, Shelley?
Yeah, so there are some pieces of equipment that if you read the cleaning manual, it will state that gaskets way deep down below, need to be replaced every so often. And then that's when you're going to really disassemble that whole entire piece of equipment to give it a really, really detailed clean when you are doing maintenance tasks like that. But like Elaine said, in terms of disassembling equipment for cleaning, you really should be doing that and following the owner's manual.
And to follow up with that, what is the best practice for ensuring staff continuously do deep cleans of equipment?
Training. So of course, training is a big one for everything at your facility. But making sure sanitation staff understand the expectations, how to properly clean, that they have those tools available to them. And then, of course, doing those verification checks. And there's lots of different verification checks. And it's not just on sanitation, but maintenance as well, right? So the verification check could be going in visually and making sure that there's no tools lying around or no spare parts. No different than checking the sanitation to make sure, it's free from debris, fat, proteins, carbs, and so on. There's ATP machines a lot of companies use, and they have a pass, a caution, or a fail. There could be swabbing that you're doing on the equipment. So lots of different ways to verify that staff is trained properly and doing their job effectively.
If your sanitation program and maintenance program run in tandem too, you could schedule it all around the same time. So a lot of people will do around less time, busy times of years, they'll do the more detailed cleaning and maintenance at that point. So if they have to tear apart for maintenance, that's a really good time for your sanitation crew to take a look at it and your QA to see, okay, you know what, are we okay, or do we need to bump this up a little bit? And if they work in tandem and they're scheduled, then you should be able to stay on top of your deep cleans of equipment for sure. I mean, there's a lot of different types of cleaning too. So if you find that, and that kind of strays into something else though, but if you find that how your cleaning is not working, dry versus wet, you might want to, there's new fogging machines for freeze, what do you call, dry ice cleaning that actually works really well in an oily or a super heavy buildup environment. And they're a lot cheaper now than they used to be. And you can rent them. You don't need to buy one unless you really feel like you need to buy one, but you can rent one and it really does the deeper cleaning, and then you can just vacuum it up. So, and it's super fast.
And I'm not sure if this question is going to come up, but I do think it's important and we should address it, is when should these maintenance tasks or preventative maintenance activities be happening? And it should not be happening during production unless it's dire needs. And if you need to do a maintenance activity during production, then of course you're covering up product or removing it, putting it in proper storage areas until that maintenance task is completed and a proper cleanup has been done before starting up again.
Okay, thank you, great answers. As for the workshops, do they need to be included in the maintenance or sanitation program?
Yes, but they probably won't be to the same super cleaning that you're going to see out in production, right? So that's either people ignore them altogether and they're kind of like on their own little island, or other people get way too into the weeds on it and expect the same level of clean out in production. So, yeah.
Basically,
we
you
run
want to
into that.
make sure the maintenance tools are clean, they're sanitized, they're in good condition, there's no rust, they're organized, they're not just thrown in a bucket like we have seen, where all of a sudden it's old parts and old greasy pieces of extra equipment and then brand new tools. Like, so your workshop needs to be tidied and organized, basically. And it is going to be part of the inspections when CFIA comes in, as well as the third party certification. So your auditors will check on the workshops.
Great. And in those workshops, what are the best practices for storing maintenance chemicals? And also outside of maintenance, if you have any tips.
So maintenance chemicals are no different than any other chemicals being brought into the facility, meaning they need to be on an approval list. They need to be appropriate for being used in a food establishment. Food grade lubricants should never be stored right next to a non-food grade lubricants. You don't want to mistakenly put a non-food grade lubricant on, a piece of equipment where there may be that chance of some grease or lubricant getting into the food. Having them properly labeled in their original containers as well as locked up, that's best practices. Even paint, if you're using paint in the establishment or any construction materials, they need to be approved for use in a food establishment. You can't just bring in any kind of paint that you wish to use, or any hydraulic fluid or greases or lubricants. You need to make sure that they are approved for use in a food establishment. Training staff on not bringing in outside chemicals is really important, because we have seen that where some staff members brought in cleaners or different lubricants that they thought would work better, and then all of a sudden you're in an audit and it's not on the approved list, nor is that chemical approved for use in a food establishment, and it could lead to a recall situation depending on how it was used.
Sure. Especially if there's any allergens in whatever they bring in, that's the big concern. Are mobile or conveyance equipment such as pallet jacks, forklifts, etc., required to be included in the preventative maintenance and sanitation program?
Yes, most definitely. You might be getting outside contractors more often than not maintaining these, so keep their service reports, because that is your record, right? You just want to make sure you have it on schedule so you don't forget about it. That's usually what people forget. They get the work done with them every year and get the report, but they forgot to sign off on it, and then they forget to actually action it through having it on a maintenance schedule and making sure it's done at a proper frequency. The level of cleaning and maintenance depends on how the mode of use of or where it's used. Something that's kept in a colder environment, may not have a lot of, in a dry environment, may not require as much like cleaning, maybe if it's super clean, or dry, or maybe with moving gaskets, or I don't know, oil or whatever. If you're not using it a whole lot, or if it's in a freezer, it tends to not wear as much as if it's in a more of a hot, humid environment, I guess.
And do those service contractors that you mentioned, would they have to be certified, trained? How does that work?
So it shouldn't be backyard Tom. If you're bringing in an electrician, the electrician should be a RID sealed certified electrician. If people are doing certain maintenance activities in the establishment, so say plumbing or electrical work, then your maintenance staff should also have the proper certifications when doing those activities. It's for their own safety, and of course to ensure that what they are doing is going to be effective and not cause any risk to food safety. So yes, they do need to have certification and training. And of course, I did already mention that there are no exceptions in terms of training on the hygiene policy. And if they're contractors coming in, that they sign in on your visitor's log and they suit up properly, just like anybody else on the processing floor would.
They can't bring their Tim Hortons cup in with them.
No Tim Hortons.
Or their Subway sub either. Even if it's
Mhm.
downtime and things aren't running, you really need to go in and make sure everybody's doing what they should say, because everybody usually takes take 2 weeks off because they're taking 2 weeks off for a shutdown. But if you sneak in there and not sneak, but go in there and check on how people are following procedures, you'll do it earlier rather than later, just to make sure the training's reinforced and that people are actually making sure that it's not going to be contamination.
And those contractors should also know your expectations, meaning they're not bringing in rusty tools. Asking them where they were before coming in. Did they just come from a dairy plant? And did they wash or sanitize those tools that now they're maybe using in a fish plant or into a bakery? So many different commodities have different allergens, and we need to be aware of that and keep that at top of mind when we are bringing in outside contractors to service the equipment.
Something we haven't talked about a whole lot would be documentation. So what kind of maintenance documentation is required and why?
I'll go on this one, Shelley. So I've seen everything from like a simple calendar. Some people use, I don't know, Microsoft Schedule or Calendar to, put all their maintenance activities in and reminders. That's worked for, depending on what certification you're under or regulatory, it does work for that. Some people go super high tech and have this big work order system that generates everything, and those are great because you can't possibly shut something down until you've done all the activities, and it really puts an effort of control in, and you can actually add in cleaning, sanitation, and notifying QA in those prompts as well. So, and it prevents them from closing off a work order if you have something automated like that.
So this also goes back to the say what you do what you say, improve it. The records is the proof that you've done it. So if you're using a contractor, those service reports will suffice as the records that you have maintained or you've done a service to a piece of equipment. Like Elaine said, you can use Excel spreadsheets, you can write it down. It really doesn't matter, but you do need to have the proof to say that, yes, on a daily basis, we're supposed to lubricate this and we've done it. On an annual basis, we're supposed to tear this apart and change the oil and we've done it. So you do need documentation to prove that you have done the activity you said you're going to do.
Great. Okay, so I checked the chat and there haven't been any questions added, so I'm gonna ask one more. What are the potential sources of contamination that people do not consider?
Heat pumps. Heat pumps are a big one. Heat pumps need maintenance and they need to be cleaned. And the frequency is going to be dependent on what you're doing at the facility. So like Elaine mentioned earlier, if you're, it's greasy, then if you have a heat pump, you're going to need to clean that heat pump more so if you're working in a greasy environment than you would be if you were working in a dry environment. Or if you were working in like a moist environment, you're going to need to clean it more than you would in a dry environment. So heat pumps are a big one. Also, the installation of heat pumps are not always considered. You don't want things blowing right into the product underneath. So the location, you need to consider that when purchasing and installing your heat pump and doing maintenance activities as well. But remember, like I mentioned, you shouldn't be doing your maintenance during production.
That goes with fly lights. Please don't put them over top of things. They need to not be over top of tables or in throughways. The other thing would be another health and safety kind of flips back and forth on that is ice buildup in a freezer. It can be incredibly hazardous if you have too much. For one thing, you're not cooling down your freezer and it's going to mess things up. But if you start seeing ice chunks hanging from the ceiling, hanging from racks, hanging from doorways, that really needs to be taken off because it could hurt somebody really bad. And condensation, that's the other thing, it can be really slippery and it's hazardous for your product as well. So
Refrigeration units. So those condensers, those units that are cooling down your temperature controlled rooms, if you are breaking down a lot of boxes, that will eventually suck up those little teeny tiny particles. And if you're not maintaining and cleaning those units, eventually it will spit all of that stuff back out all over your clean equipment, your tables, and so on. So it's really important to ensure that the refrigeration units are being maintained. Most people will bring in a third party to do that at least annually, but it is going to depend on what you're doing in your facility. You may have to have them come in more frequently. That did happen to us when I worked at the meat plant. It almost looked like sand debris. We'd come in the morning and we were trying to figure out where it came from, and it was because of breaking down cardboard boxes.
Great. Those are definitely some good things to keep an eye on when you're maintaining a facility for sure. All right, so now I'm going to share a couple more slides just about funding opportunities and
well, here's my favorite part of the funding opportunity. Here's the technical advice. I love talking to all sorts of different people from all sorts of different commodities, being third-party certified or regulatory, and helping them problem solve or troubleshoot a situation, or just bouncing off an idea to make sure you're doing the right thing, the safe thing. So don't be afraid to give us a call or email or chat. We can help you implement the equipment maintenance, portion of things, or we can talk to you at a situation, you're a mechanical or a micro situation that you're having, and kind of you could show us pictures or video or whatever, and sometimes just having that third party, chat with you helps you problem solve something and faster and get you back on the road to full production.
And the best part of that technical advice is it's free. So it's like phone a friend for free. Let's talk it through. Sometimes you just need to, have a buddy to start talking, and then you're like, the eureka moment. Ah, yeah, I never thought of that. So it's free, folks.
and next we'll let Shelley talk about training.
So not sure how many of you realize, but Perinia does offer lots of different training opportunities. We have virtual instructor-led sessions. We have in-person sessions. We also offer customized training. So you can go to our website and then click on the quality and food safety, scroll down to learning opportunities, and you will see all of the upcoming sessions. In October, we're going to be offering in-person developing and implementing preventive controls, prerequisite programs. That's a 2-day session, very interactive, as well as the developing a HACCP plan. That's my favorite course to facilitate because you guys do all the work and I just sit back and give you some guidance. We're going to have more free Ask Us Anything. Another thing to keep in mind is if there's any pain points or any Ask Us Anything subjects that you guys would like us to talk on, let us know. All of these sessions are created because of industry coming to us and saying, we're having difficulties with this or this is challenging. So if there's a topic, a specific topic you would like us to discuss, please let us know and we will definitely do our best to fill it in. And then developing your internal auditor skills is coming up in November. And we also have senior management training in November as well. So check out our upcoming training. And if there's something that, is not quite meeting your needs, we can do custom for you. So just reach out.
And there are some funding opportunities that are live right now. So there's the Local Supplier Food Safety Support Program. There's also the Food Ventures Program and the Nova Scotia Beef Abattoir and Processing Assistance Program. I won't go into much detail about them, but you can find out everything you need to know at perennia.ca/programs. And that will tell you your eligibility, how much funding, the services it can cover, and everything. All that's on the website. There's also something I want to bring up is that there's a Dalhousie PhD candidate, and he's conducting research on maintenance strategies and digital transformation in small and medium-sized manufacturing enterprises. So he has asked if we could share a survey link that would help support his research to better understand and improve maintenance practices in the manufacturing sector. So I'm going to pop that survey into the chat, and if you guys want to take part in that survey to give him some details about your facility, all the responses provided will be confidential and they won't be linked to your company in any way. But he wants that information for his research. So I will add that link shortly, and if you could fill out the survey for him, that would be very helpful. We always like to support our graduates and students. Okay. And other than that, I don't believe there were any more questions. I'm just gonna check the box one last time. Oh, there were, okay. So Majid, that's the PhD candidate. He sent the link. So I'm going to share that with everybody now. Perfect. There's the link for the survey. And this has been approved by the Research Ethics Board as well, for those that take part in it. And I want to thank everybody for attending our webinar. I hope you learned lots and are taking some tips and tricks home with you. And was there anything else you guys wanted to add?
Nope, but if you end up sitting on everything we talked about and have questions on your maintenance program or any problems they're popping up, don't forget about the free technical advice. And if you really want to write your own HACCP plan, jump on Shelley's training.
I promise it will be fun.
Oh, she makes it fun. HACCP is not a fun subject, but it's a necessity now. So jump on some fun training that's local too as well.
Thank you everyone for your attendance.